Okay, so I missed a couple of people on the last critiques because I had pulled down an earlier version of exercise 1. So let's go ahead and do a really quick review of those 3 that I missed. We'll start with Stefan here. Okay, so in relation to what we were seeing in some of the other videos, I think that you're kind of getting some of the same issues, and that like a lot of things are kind of moving at the same time. You're getting some decent overlap in the tail, but I think you'd have a little bit more overlap in the actual body. And that seems like a confusing statement because the body feels like it's one thing. How do you have overlap in it? But you have multiple controls there. So, for example, does the rotation of the body have to happen on the same frames that the translation does? Or can one channel of the rotation be offset? Can sort of this forward and backward motion be offset at a different time? You get a little bit of some looseness when he does that wiggle there at the end, and that feels nice. Especially, the tail's actually looking pretty good. I think you could still loosen it up a little bit more. But that's the things I would notice. Let me open it up again in QuickTime so I can scrub. QuickTime stubborn. And so, yeah. So I think it could still use a little bit of work on how the character sort of pops up off the ground here. As it kind of stretches out, but then it just kind of drifts up from there. So I think working on that tangent a little bit. It also starts to squash before it even hits the ground here. So usually what I do is the frame before it hits, I go ahead and have that stretched out so you kind of have a little bit more impact to that squash. Yeah, you kind of got the squash going on before it contacts on a lot of those. So, but otherwise it's looking pretty good, and I think just working a little bit to kind of loosen it up will help. Some of your timing could probably be a little poppier too, a little faster. So, let's look here. Who else did we miss? I think I missed Allie. This one's interesting because you do a camera change. Let me go ahead and open it in QuickTime while I'm still thinking of it. Anyway, so this one's interesting because you have a camera change in here, and I think it's one of the only ones that anybody turned in that actually had a camera, had any camera work to that extent. So some of your jumps in this are looking really nice. Like this jump here and landing, that looks really good. Especially with the tail. That tail has some nice... I feel like it could have maybe overshot a little bit more at the end there, but otherwise it's looking pretty good. I would have a little bit of a note here on sort of this staging. It starts off alright, and I feel like you could just end it here with at this point the camera could be a little further out. And then when I look at this, and part of it is because it's a play blast, but I thought that like it's kind of hard to figure out where this is in space. So having it connected to the ground would just kind of give us a little bit more. Like, is it floating up above this box, or is it floating? So like and that's a lot of it's because it's a play blast. So there's no depth, no shadows, and stuff like that. But that would help a little bit to communicate that. And this last landing feels a little like we come in contact and maybe it kind of settles a little too much right there. Like it needs to kind of pop down, kind of like what you have going on here with that one. That one just feels really good. So then when that one kind of squishes a little too slow, we kind of feel that a little bit. So I think you can kind of beef that up just a little bit, but otherwise this is looking really good. And let's see, the other one was Tate. It's an MOV, so it should open up in QuickTime, but it doesn't. So gotta make it. There we go. Yeah, it's looking good. View loop. Um, so I think there's still a decent amount you could do to kind of loosen up the tail. The tail's feeling a little like you're getting some good poses, but stuff like this, like how it goes from this curve to this curve, feels a little linear. When I think you could actually do a little bit more with the drag, to where you can make it feel a little bit more like, let me see, like the top of it is, like this base is starting first and pulling up, and then the rest of the bottom of the tail sort of drags along behind it and flips up. And instead it just kind of goes kind of linearly. So I think you need to pop into a stretch a little faster here. Right now it's going from this, and you don't get stretched until maybe here. And then you kind of squash before you hit the ground here. So what you're doing is you're kind of doing a stretch at the peak. And what I usually do is I do a squash immediately, like 1 or 2 keyframes later, followed by a stretch. And then I kind of sort of, can either leave it stretched up here at the top, or you kind of, normalize it a little bit at the top. And then a stretch right before it contacts the ground. That way you get this pop into the squash. And I think you get a little bit more intensity that way. The spacing looks pretty good on that one. And here, this feels like it kind of squishes kind of late. It also kind of feels like it sort of settles into that, like it kind of eases into it, and the spacing gets kind of smaller as it comes in, which is an issue that we were seeing with some others earlier. And then this one's kind of got that going on. It's kind of starting to squash before it gets there. I think also your tangent is feeling kind of weird. It's making it feel like your arc kind of feels like it's doing this, and sort of like moving forward at the end. So I don't know if that's if it really is or not, but it's something to kind of consider. And also, you just feel a little bit like you're squashing before you get there a little bit, like it's already starting to squash down here instead of having you stretch here. And then it squashes, but it's kind of slow. It's over like 4 or 5 frames, so it just feels a little soft and floaty there. So those will be my big notes on those. I think that's everybody. I think I still may be missing one from somebody, but I'll have to double check and make sure. If you've turned yours in or put it in the wrong place or something, please let me know, and I'll try to get you feedback if I can. Thanks. I'll be moving on to Project 1 next. Hopefully you'll start receiving feedback for that pretty soon. Bye.